Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to Test Tube Plus again today. This is Trace, and this is episode 3 of 5 in our series on engines. So far we've talked about how engines work and the difference between like a straight 6 and a V6. We've also talked about who invented the internal combustion engine. It's not just one person. There are a lot of people who have figured this stuff out. So make sure you check out both of those episodes before today's. Today we're going to talk about what powers these things. You know, usually you just say gas. But what is that? Gasoline is the fuel of the car, right? This is the essence of what makes the internal combustion engine work. It is the combusty part of the ICE. But what is car fuel made of? What is it? It's oil, but it's not oil. It's refined oil. But what does that mean? According to the Agency for Toxic and Disease Registry, gasoline is a refined product of petroleum consisting of a mixture of hydrocarbons, additives, and blending agents. That clears it right up. Not at all. The composition of gasoline hydrocarbons, by the way, usually something like 4 to 8% alkanes, 2 to 5% alkenes, 25 to 40% isoalkanes, 3 to 7% cycloalkanes, 1 to 4% cycloalkenes, and 20 to 50% total aromatics, 0.5 to 2.5% benzene. Holler at you, Bertha. But of course, that varies. The process of getting crude oil and turning it into gasoline is crazy. If you've driven down the highways of the Midwest and California and places in the East Coast and, elsewhere in the world as well, you've likely seen a refinery, a gasoline or an oil refinery, right? Looks like a giant chemistry set by the highway, and there's lights everywhere and tubes and tanks and things going up and down and condensing and heating and cooling and all sorts of crazy stuff, because this product is so highly refined and so much chemistry goes into that. This is an insane process. Crude oil extracted from the earth is actually not all that helpful. It needs to be refined in order to be used in all of the different ways that we use it. Crude oil comes right out of the ground, and then they test it for 2 distinct characteristics so that they can find out how much they can charge for it and what kind of quality that crude oil is. The first characteristic they test is specific gravity, which is kind of like density. It measures how thick or how heavy the oil is. It can be heavy, intermediate, or light. Heavy or thicker oil, it takes more time to make that oil usable in our cars or in other ways. And the second characteristic that they measure is the oil's sulfur content. Low sulfur crude oil is called sweet oil. And high sulfur crude oil, I'm sure you can guess, is sour oil. The more sour the oil, sounds bad because it is, the more refining it will need, because sulfur is actually harmful. It gets in the way of the catalysts in the refining process. Sulfur also can corrode pipes in the refineries. It's just not good altogether. You want your oil to be light and sweet. That's where the money's at. And that's where that is. Ideal oil, light, sweet. There are actually refineries that specialize in refining the heavy sour crude oil. Once the oil is extracted, it needs to be transported to refineries. That's usually done from the fields into oil tankers over water or through pipelines. Then comes the refining process. In the US alone, every day, 647 million gallons of petroleum is refined. That's 15.4 million barrels in the United States alone. Wow, that's a lot. The refining process consists of 3 different stages: distillation, conversion, and then blending or alkylation as well. Distillation is how they heat up and separate the petroleum into different products. So you take the crude oil and you heat it up, and that changes it into a gas, not gas, not like gasoline. When they heat it up, they're going to do this in 2 different places depending on the quality of the oil: the crude tower and the vacuum tower. The crude tower holds the crude oil in a furnace that heats it up. The oil gets hot and it starts to separate because the hydrocarbons that make up crude oil have different boiling points. As a chemistry sidebar, a chain with just one carbon atom in it, like a CH4 or a methane, CH4. That's the lightest, so it's going to rise to the top. And then the hydrocarbon molecule, that's already going to be a gas. Then there's hydrocarbon chains with lots of C's and lots of, like a big long one. Those ones are heavier. They have a higher boiling point, so they're going to sink to the bottom. That makes sense? It's a heavier molecule. It's more complex. A lighter molecule goes to the top. So you end up with all these different layers of hydrocarbons out of the crude oil. Gasoline, that boils at a fairly low temperature. It's kind of a shorter hydrocarbon chain, so it rises up to the top. Not as high as methane, but it's up there. Asphalt, high boiling temperature, complex molecule, lots of carbons and hydrogens, settles near the bottom of the tower. The temperatures required to get heavier components of the crude oil to separate, or what they call crack. If they're too much for the crude tower, which can only take so much of it, then they send what is at the bottom of the crude tower into the vacuum tower. The vacuum tower reduces the temperature needed to break up heavy components because of the way chemistry works, right? The things like pressure, temperature, those are all related. So if you use a vacuum, you can make things that have higher boiling points boil at lower temperatures. It's how vacuums work. Once everything is separated, then we can head to the next phase. We've taken, the gasoline and the methane and the natural gas and this petroleum and that petroleum product. We've taken them all and we've sent them through those pipes in the refinery to different places. This is where they are then converted. I wasn't kidding when I said this is like a giant chemistry set. This is exactly what it is. These tubes and all of these different places inside of the refinery take the crude oil and turn it into something else. It's like a factory. During conversion, they're changing the molecular structures of these separated components and making them into something they can use in another process. They add chemicals, catalysts, pressure, and heat. Very much chemistry. The conversion process happens in 3 different areas of the refinery. They've got the coker, the hydrocracker, and the fluidized catalytic cracker, or FCC. Inside of the coker, that baby receives the heaviest of the products from the distillation process from the vacuum tower. So it goes from the crude tower to the vacuum tower, and then maybe the vacuum tower into the coker. The coker uses heat and pressure to convert the products into lighter components. It breaks them up so they can be used for other things. Then there's the hydrocracker. It's got hydro in there, so you can probably guess what's coming up next. That's where the next heaviest components from the distillation process go, and they use hydrogen and other catalysts to break up those components so they can use those in different processes. The fluidized catalytic cracker takes the very top of the crude tower, the lightest components, and uses chemical catalysts to break larger molecules into smaller ones. For the components that are too light to become gasoline, they get put through a process called alkylation, and that combines those molecules to make heavier, high-octane fuels, things that are going to have a lot of bang for their buck. Then, at the end, is blending. Pretty self-explanatory. During the blending process, they combine different components based on the product that they're trying to create. So they'll take something that maybe has a lot of bang and mix it with something that's going to calm it down a bit. They'll add something that they need these components, and they will blend them together to create a product. They can also add a desulfurization process to each of these refining processes because no one wants sulfur. Remember, it's damaging and it's bad, and of course it smells. There are all sorts of different types of fuels. Gasoline is one, and there are different levels of gasoline. There's high octane, middle octane, low octane gasoline. There's gasoline that's mixed with ethanol. There's gasoline that's different percentages of ethanol. There's diesel. There's biodiesel, which is diesel mixed with ethanol. There's all sorts of crazy stuff when it comes to fuels. I mean, there's even leaded and unleaded fuel, right? Throughout history. Obviously, you want to make sure you make the right choice for your car, and it's kind of nice to know what that is. What's coming out of the ground there and going into your tank? We'd like to stop and take a second and thank our sponsor for this series, Toyota. The Toyota RAV4 Hybrid lets your sense of wonder lead the way and drives your passions further, which is something that we live every day here on Test Tube Plus. We try and get way deep into these topics, so thanks to them. Make sure you let us know down in the comments what you thought of this episode. It was pretty crazy, right? With all these different processes. If you know more about it or you want to know more about it, let us know down in the comments and we'll see if we can get you some resources on that. Also, keep coming back here to Test Tube Plus for more videos. We're going to have episode 4 in this series about alternatives to car engines, the way that we think of them now, coming up tomorrow. So make sure you tune in. We'll see you then.